Okay, good evening. Welcome to the September 12th, 2017 Board of Education meeting. We have 7 board members present, none absent, and I'd like to start with the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have public comments next, and we ask that you speak for up to 3 minutes, and the board doesn't respond at this time, but we do respond at a later date. So first on our list is Bianca Parisi.
A little bit about myself. My name is Bianca Parisi. I am a graduate of York High School, class of 1994. My husband and I purchased our first home in Elmhurst in 2001. We live in the Barons Park neighborhood, and my boys are 3rd and 5th graders at Emerson. We sleep with brand new windows closed and our air conditioning on. We live in the O'Hare flight path of 4 right, 22 left. During and after the O'Hare expansion, this runway was only supposed to be used during inclement weather or in emergencies. Since the Fly Quiet runway rotation tests have begun, my family has not been getting the sleep needed. For the current runway rotation test, which is test 3, this is especially true. As everyone knows, school started on Wednesday, August 16th. That Tuesday night, my boys went to bed at 8:30, 9 o'clock, and this is how our night went. The plane started between 1,500 and 1,600 feet. This is when they fly over my home. They started at 11:20 p.m. The next one, 11:23, 11:27, 11:34, 11:41, 11:42, 11:44, 11:45, 11:52, 11:59, 12:03, 12:13, 12:26, 12:28, 12:31, 12:40, 12:46. Here we got a break. They started up again at 3:15, 3:38, 3:59, 4:01, 4:02, 4:04, 4:08, 4:10, 4:16, 4:18, 4:22, 4:37, 4:39, 4:40, 4:43, 4:46, 4:49, 5 o'clock, 5:04, 5:08, 5:10, 5:11, and 5:13. They finally stopped and went back to their normal rotation at that point. My children and many other children in the Emerson, Conrad Fisher, and Churchville neighborhoods got to start their first day of school exhausted, tired, and impaired, because not only did they not get a full night's sleep, but what little sleep they did get was interrupted. When we moved to our neighborhood before the runway rotation tests, we never got these nighttime flights. Did we have daytime air traffic? Of course. We live 10 miles from a busy airport. My husband and I understood this when we picked our neighborhood. This Fly Quiet Test 3 could become permanent. We don't know. What I do know is that currently, every other week until mid-October, our nights are as I mentioned above. In fact, this is our on week. This morning, this is what we dealt with. My kids can't maintain this sort of sleep schedule and be good and active learners. How can they be expected to remain focused and pay attention when they've had consecutive nights of interrupted sleep? How can they remain competitive in the classroom and be the best that they can be when they can't keep their eyes open through no fault of their own? I'm asking that the District 205 Board advocate on behalf of my children and other children in our community. I'm asking that the District 205 Board become part of the ONCC to represent the children of Elmhurst and to fight alongside our City Council representation for what is best for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anne Marie Gustafson.
Good evening. I'm here tonight to urge the Board of Education for District 205 to join the ONCC and oppose nighttime runway rotations. My name is Anne Marie Gustafson. My husband and I have lived in Elmhurst since 2012. We have 3 young daughters. Layla is in 3rd grade. Dylan just started kindergarten. They are at Emerson Elementary. And Marley is in the 4-year-old preschool program at Treetown. As a parent, I have always been very strict about bedtime. Since our girls have always been early risers in the morning, they go to bed early at night, much earlier than most families, according to my oldest. But I am a firm believer that quality sleep is a major contributing factor to our children's health and well-being. As parents, we are all well aware of the torture that is sleep deprivation. When our kids were infants, we could be up all night, every 2 hours or every 2 minutes. Now that our girls are school-aged, I thought we were well past the days of several night wakings, until the fly quiet testing rotation began. We live directly on the flight path of the diagonal for our 22L, and our family's sleep is greatly affected by this rotation test. We have been impacted since the first phase of the testing last summer, and we installed new windows in our home, purchased sound machines and fans for the kids' rooms, and sought out different methods to try to handle the frequent disruptions in our family's sleep. Now we are in phase 3 with nighttime air traffic every other week. The very first day of school this year, we had to send tired, cranky children to new classrooms with new teachers and new friends. 2 weeks ago, on August 31st, we had low-flying descending planes over our house, waking up our children multiple times. 12:18, 12:24, 12:28, 3:02, 3:48, 3:52, 3:59, 4:07, 4:10, 4:12, 4:14, 4:16, 4:19, 4:29, 4:32, 4:33, 4:35, 4:37, 4:39, etc., etc. 31 planes in total until 5:30 a.m. We had to keep our oldest daughter home from school that day. She had a cold that morning, but she was so completely exhausted from the interruptions in her sleep that night that we knew that she would not be able to focus if we sent her to school. As a 3rd grader, this is her first year in the Reach Language Arts program, and she had to miss her first full session with her Reach teacher that day. This is now not only affecting our children's sleep, it is affecting their education. I can only imagine how difficult it must be for the teachers in our district to keep sleep-deprived children on task all throughout the day. Many Elmhurst families are affected by this rotation test, not just those of us directly on the flight path, and we are all understandably concerned about what an extension of the nighttime rotations could do to our children's growing minds and bodies. Our kids deserve every opportunity we can give them, and this particular fly quiet testing rotation is detrimental to their health, well-being, and ability to learn. I went to Emerson's school website to try to see how many days my oldest daughter missed last year. It seemed like she was sick much more often in the last school year, contracting influenza for the first time ever in her life. I was wondering if there was a correlation between the days she was absent and the days her sleep were interrupted from the airplane noise. There was. But on the website of Emerson Elementary, under Parent Resources, Tips for Parents, was an article titled, "Help Your Children Get a Good Night's Sleep." So now I put this to you, the Board of Education for District 205. Help our children get a good night's sleep. Be a voice and a vote on the ONCC to oppose these nighttime runway rotations. Our children are looking to you, the leaders of our district, to be their advocate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Carol Snyder.
Hi, I'm Carol Snyder. I have 2 children who attend York. I'm here tonight to express my support for the resolution approving District 205's membership and participation in the O'Hare Noise Compatibility Commission, or ONCC. For those who don't know, the ONCC serves as an advisory agency to the Chicago Department of Aviation, or CDA, who in turn submits requests to the FAA regarding O'Hare Airport operations. One of the most pressing issues facing O'Hare has been nighttime noise abatement. To address this issue, the Fly Quiet program was developed in an effort to balance the impacts of overnight aircraft noise between affected communities. Fly Quiet is a voluntary program that uses designated preferential runways and flight tracks, which are developed by the CDA in cooperation with the ONCC. Currently, Fly Quiet is in a testing phase in order to explore a condition that could be in place from the spring of 2018 through 2020, at which time a new runway will be commissioned. Fly Quiet plans will thereafter be reevaluated and a new permanent nighttime runway rotation plan will be considered. Unfortunately, the runway rotation plan being tested is highly inequitable. In Fly Quiet Test 3, there are 6 designated flight arrival pathways in rotation. However, 33% of all Fly Quiet time has been allocated to only one of those arrival pathways, the one over Elmhurst. That is not fair, that is not balanced, that is not equitable. Now, why is Fly Quiet relevant to District 205? Well, you've just heard the parents' testimony. Sleep-deprived kids are learning-impaired kids. Fly Quiet has the potential to undermine learning readiness and academic achievement by repeatedly disrupting student sleep over sustained periods of the time throughout the school year. Students who reside in the flight path are subjected to noise from low-flying aircraft, which arrive anywhere from 1 to 4 minutes apart during peak overnight times. For many students, this means they're tired, cranky, and unfocused during the following school day. Those who do not live in a flight path may have difficulty understanding why some residents are now speaking out on this issue. Please try to understand that these overnight Fly Quiet rotation plans are being tested because other communities around O'Hare are speaking out. These flight rotations are new, they are inequitable, and they may potentially be made permanent. During Fly Quiet hours, flight arrivals repeatedly batter the same swath of homes with high levels of nighttime noise, often for hours at a time. We simply cannot allow the inequity seen in Test 3 to persist. I therefore support District 205 in joining the 17 other school districts currently represented on the ONCC. Other communities are speaking up for their students. Elmhurst needs to do the same for ours. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Monica Anderson?
Hello, my name is Monica Anderson. I have 2 children. I have one a freshman at York and one a 6th grader at Churchville. I am here tonight to ask that you please consider adding District 205 to the ONCC committee to represent Elmhurst. After going to the ONCC meeting in Des Plaines last Friday, communities farther distance from Elmhurst from the airport have school district representation, and we currently do not. My children are being impacted by this very unfair current Test 3 rotation. Planes all night long are keeping them awake that are going over our house. My kids are asking me in the middle of the night, I'm really tired, can you please put the fan on? I'm very tired these days from hearing the airplanes landing over our house all night long for a week straight at a time. I can only imagine how this is affecting my kids at school. Thank you.
Okay, that's the end of our public comments. I don't have any other names on the list. We'll move to reports and presentations. First is all-day kindergarten feasibility study.
Okay, so good evening. Last year during the community engagement portion and thought exchange portion of the Focus 205 process, all-day kindergarten emerged as a community priority. The district commissioned an all-day kindergarten feasibility study. Tonight, Dr. Cordigan will present the results of Phase 1 of this study, which is an analysis of the approach of the highest achieving suburban districts as it relates to all-day kindergarten. One of the district's key performance indicators is reading on grade level by 3rd grade. Research on all-day kindergarten shows positive effects for students in the following areas: faster gains in language and literacy development when compared to students in a half-day program, enhanced social, emotional, and behavioral development, decreased need for, well, actually, let me backtrack a little bit. The literacy skills, the social, emotional skills, and then thirdly, additional opportunities for play and experiential learning. What this can lead to is a decreased need for remedial intervention services and a narrowing of the achievement gap because at-risk students have enhanced opportunities at earlier ages. And so at this point, I would like to turn this over to Dr. Cordigan to share with you his findings.
Hi, I'm Steve Cordigan, and thank you for having me here today. I've been conducting research in the public sector for over 40 years now. In the recent decades, I served as the Director of Research at Illinois Math and Science Academy and as the Director of Research and Evaluation in Township High School District 214. I currently work with a variety of school districts and educational organizations on the statistical analysis and interpretation of assessment and other research data. I have also been serving for some years as the chair of the State Board of Education's Testing Committee, which, given the state of the state, sometimes feels like being the head nautical engineer on the Titanic. Finally, I have 10th and 12th graders in Geneva High School, so my current experience with public education is both as a parent and a researcher. I've had the opportunity to speak to the District 205 community about ACT testing some years ago, so it's good to be back in your community again. Dr. Moyer asked me to be here today to describe the findings from a survey of comparable districts to determine whether they implemented all-day kindergarten, which we will refer to as ADK, what the programs looked like, and what challenges did they encounter in the process. And now when I say comparable districts, I am focusing on those districts that are similar in terms of academic performance and unit district structure, that is not high school or elementary districts. 12 of the state's 387 unit districts are distinctly higher performing than the rest of the state. And 9 of those districts happen to be in the western suburbs, and your district is one of them. The other 8 districts are the comparable districts. When we look at an issue like all-day kindergarten that has significant academic impact, we need to focus on those districts that have similarly high academic performance standards. These are the academically comparable districts. Now, the academically comparable districts are not comparable in all ways. They obviously have different levels of enrollment. Elmhurst is slightly on the lower end in terms of enrollment, although basically at the middle. And in terms of free reduced lunch levels, again, Elmhurst is slightly below the average of the comparable districts. These are the questions that were asked of the comparable districts. Take a moment to read them. Can everyone see those okay? All right. Now, all but one comparable district has all-day kindergarten. So 7 of them do have it. However, there are definite additional details to just whether or not they have all-day kindergarten or not. All districts, including Elmhurst, have kindergarten, all-day kindergarten for students identified as academically at risk or English language learners. The district without ADK for students who are not at risk also had offered it through the school in the past, but had gone to a half-day paired with an afternoon enrichment program offered by its park district. They were going to bring back the all-day kindergarten program as soon as finances allowed. They also, because they were only able to offer it to a limited group of their students, there was a lot of concern in the community with the lottery-based system for having access to all-day kindergarten. And now another one of the districts that offers all-day kindergarten, their afternoon rather than a full academic program is really focused more on enrichment and guided play. Now, as you see, all of the programs have been initiated in the past 11 years. Most of them have been initiated in the past 8 years, as shown by this timeline. Districts offer all-day kindergarten at their existing grade schools for the most part, with only one district actually relocating any all-day kindergarten students. However, due to the very limited demand in several of the districts for half-day kindergarten, those half-day students sometimes have to be relocated from the school that would normally serve their houses. While 4 of the 7 schools treat all-day kindergarten as any other grade, charging no additional fees, 3 charge a substantial fee. As you see, you have a fee at 3 of the schools of $2,000, $3,500, and $4,000 per year. Now, there is a relationship between cost and usage level. In the 4 districts with no additional cost, almost 100% are enrolled. In the district with a $2,000 cost, 83% enrolled. $3,500 district, 70 to 80% enrolled. And in the $4,000 district, 47% enrolled. But it is a rapidly growing first-come, first-served program, and there would be a lot more students enrolled if the district had the capacity to handle it. There have been no families reported to have returned to half-day after trying all-day kindergarten. Now, when we get to the challenges the districts faced in implementing all-day kindergarten, well, as you would expect, implementing a new curriculum is going to be a challenge. But you have to cover twice the original time allocation for the kindergarten students. They have to incorporate the new kindergarten standards into this additional half day. And there is always a debate in that extension. How much of it is a more rigorous academic curriculum and how much of it is enrichment and guided play? After all, these are kindergarten students. And then when you have a few non-half-day students, or in some districts over half, it's how do you provide them with at least a roughly equivalent curriculum, but only within a half day. And then, of course, there's a ripple effect. If you've educated these children at a higher level as kindergartners, well, you're going to have to change your first grade curriculum to accommodate these better educated students. And finally, there's a lot of professional development time that needs to be invested to accomplish these goals. Any questions at this point? Okay. Now, there are also non-curricular challenges. You have a bunch of students who were there a half day and are suddenly there a full day, and so you have a lot more, you have to house a lot more students at any given time and in the same facilities. And then there are the issues of how to pay for all-day kindergarten and the related issues of whether to offer it to all and whether or not you offer it all at once or phase it in. Now, as far as research on the effects of all-day kindergarten, the districts that are comparable have not done a lot of extensive research simply because they don't necessarily have the capacity to do that kind of research and because some of the programs are rather new. They have found, though, that it has greatly enhanced the at-risk students' learning in subsequent years. The research in general that has been done, as Dr. Moyer referenced, all of the research has found, yes, half-day kindergarten all-day kindergarten does enhance students' learning and their future performance, their subsequent performance in first grade and beyond. There has not been a study that found anything but. Now, there are already many providers of early childhood education and daycare in the Elmhurst area, as in all of the other comparable districts. There are a lot of offers as providers of daycare, and some of them provide some level of academic enrichment. Now, but we did have your district conducted a brief survey this last spring and found that, and this reached about 500 Elmhurst residents whose children were entering kindergarten, and most of the 212 respondents expressed an interest in all-day kindergarten. The graph, as you see, shows that over 50% would be interested in all-day kindergarten even if there was an additional cost. Another 35.1% expressed an interest, but only if there was not an additional cost, and 12.4% were not interested in all-day kindergarten. Now, of those who were interested in all-day kindergarten, the majority would either participate at a central location, a very small percentage. Most would prefer it at their home school, but would still participate if it were at a central location. 47.2% expressed feelings that they would only participate if it was offered at their home school. However, several of the districts that had to phase it in and didn't offer it immediately at all of the schools in their district, the parents, once they found that the opportunity was there and they would have to possibly relocate their students because they couldn't accommodate them at the home school, they did opt for all-day kindergarten anyway. So these questions would have to be repeated in an additional survey before we made any final conclusions on just what percentage of potential participants would participate under different circumstances. Now, your district in particular has to consider several additional issues. Your current facility space won't permit all-day kindergarten at all sites. So currently, you would have to locate some students. You are going to have to do some facility construction and updating. It is liable to be in the cards for the next few years. And without any additional funding to the budget, all-day kindergarten currently could be offered only through requiring an additional fee. So, and this is the same kinds of issues that most of the districts have faced. So, in conclusion, among the comparable high-performing districts in this state, all-day kindergarten is the norm. It has become an integral part of academic programs. And of course, Elmhurst's implementation of all-day kindergarten is going to be integral to the facilities issues that you will be facing in the coming years. So do you have any questions that you want to ask me about my experience of talking with the other districts?
Thank you very much, Steve, for that that information. A couple of questions.
Sure.
The first one, the slide where you talked about, I believe you said some programs. Well, first, I thought you talked about half-day programs. So just to get a clarification, half-day would still be included or would be offered as a part of the all-day? Is that a standard, or how does that work?
It depends on the district. That gets back to the percentage of students participating. So, let's see, that would have been, in the 4 districts where they do not charge for all-day kindergarten, pretty much 100% of the students are enrolled. They might have 2 or 3 that are enrolled in half-day. They accommodate those students as best they can. However, it is pretty almost universal all-day kindergarten.
Okay.
Functionally.
So I think, and I just want to make sure that in case you were hinting at this, if we were to offer all-day kindergarten, half-day kindergarten would remain an option. The law does not require all-day kindergarten, so half-day kindergarten still would be a choice for families.
Okay, thank you.
But what he's suggesting is that when the program has begun in districts, it has gained popularity, and typically more and more students choose to enroll over time.
Okay.
So what these figures say, when you have 83% are enrolled in all-day kindergarten, 17% are not. When they say 70 to 80% are enrolled in all-day kindergarten, 20 to 30% are not.
Okay, all right. So thank you. And that was, I was getting to try and understand that this would still be an option. Half-day program would still be an option in the district. So thank you for that question. I'm wondering, for those other 8 comparison schools, which of those schools have dual language programs, and how the dual language program correlates with the all-day kindergarten?
I didn't investigate that.
Okay.
I think a lot of that is probably dependent on the population, their population, and whether they have a sufficient number to have a dual language program.
Okay. And then one last question.
Sure.
You talked about the one slide where you talked about, I thought you said there were 500 residents that were polled that would have children who are eligible for all-day
Approximately
kindergarten.
500.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right. And approximately 212 of those responded, and that was the pie chart that you showed with those
Right.
212 responded. Okay,
Which is a pretty high percentage of respondents,
Yes,
given,
got that.
you know,
right.
given survey research.
Yeah, okay. So then my last thought on this all-day kindergarten, what have you seen to be the biggest hurdle, not from a facility perspective, more from a change management perspective? What do you see as the biggest hurdle in moving from a half-day program to an all-day program?
Well, obviously there are, as I said with the 2 slides, there are certainly curricular challenges.
Right.
And, you know, it's just, but districts are able to develop a curriculum for all-day kindergarten. But then the challenge is simply, there is certainly a big challenge of who pays. And half the comparable districts decided that, no, it's going to be part of our budget. And then 3 of the 4 remaining decided, no, we are going to have it on a fee basis. And obviously significantly different fee levels when you're talking 2,000 versus 4,000. So it is a matter of what the community wants to do, what their approach, what they want it to be. And facilities is, you know, that is, if you have room already, as for example my home community did, it was a much easier implementation because they did have the space. When you don't have the space, you have a much more of a challenge.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Steve. I'm going to, I have three questions. The first
Sure.
will be based on what Margaret was talking about with a half-day and full-day. So how do districts serve students educationally as they enter first grade with an all-day kindergarten and a half-day option?
Well, they are served as students coming into first grade. There may be differences as to whether they have had all-day kindergarten or not. On the other hand, there are parents who will provide a lot of enrichment activities, and there will not be a disparity. There is a potential for disparity simply because all-day kindergarten does tend to impart more learning than students who are not exposed to it.
Okay,
So
so,
it's just going to be kind of the same sort of situation as with any, you have a bell curve of levels of preparation of incoming students at every grade.
I would say that in some respects, although I totally understand the question, and I think that there are challenges embedded in that, we face some of those already, because we do have students that elect to take a private school option for kindergarten or a private school option in the afternoon, and then come to us in first grade. So some of that currently exists in our current structure.
And some of it exists at kindergarten because students who have been in preschool are liable to have better preparation for kindergarten than students who have not.
okay. And if that is the way that the community looks at it, we do know districts that are doing this and have gone through the hurdles, and you're already talking to them, I'm sure. Okay. So then I'll go into the second question, which once again is curricular. So you said if there's a half a day and a full day, or you move to all-day kindergarten, you have to adjust the first grade curriculum. I would then think you'd have to adjust second grade at least too, or do they really catch up?
Oh, no, that's a ripple effect. It should affect their learning ad infinitum because they've gotten a head start.
Okay, so I didn't want to make
And that's what
that.
the research has found.
I didn't want us to make that assumption, because I guess what we need to say is it does impact the whole district. And so we'd have to look at that. Okay.
Yes.
So I don't want to minimize what effort would have to go into this. And then lastly, your study actually does show that we really do have to have support for our facilities and accommodate pretty much all of our buildings to help do all-day kindergarten. If we wanted to accommodate all students versus some of these options that you have here.
I think what the districts face is having the capacity to offer it. That is perhaps the biggest challenge because where you see these percentages of students enrolled, a lot of these communities would have more students enrolled if they had the capacity.
Correct. And the survey showed that our parents would want the all-day kindergarten at the home school or the neighborhood school. I guess all these things it's what I guess I assume from living in this community for so long based on surveys that we've done in the past. And so, it's something as we go into further phases of Focus 205, I think that we just need this information in the study that you've provided gives us more data to then share with the community about what's required.
Ideally, everyone you want to send your children to the school that is as close to your home as is possible. What the reality has been in some of these districts, parents did not initially want to have to send their kids elsewhere, but when faced with the option of not sending them to all-day kindergarten and sending them to another location where they could have access to all-day kindergarten, they chose the latter.
Okay, so there's one last question then. So the survey that we have implemented, or you did, that you showed in this slide.
It was done by the district.
Okay, that's what I
spring
thought.
before.
Okay, that's what I thought.
I was not involved, but it was, your district did that in spring.
Correct. So what you just stated, though, kind of negates what our survey response said. Our survey response said they would, I think it was 47%, I didn't write it down.
Oh, no.
That they wanted the neighborhood schools, not, that they wouldn't do all-day kindergarten if it were a centralized location.
Right, and that's what several of the districts that I surveyed also said they had that same experience. But the parents, as I said, once faced with either if we don't send them, if they don't go a little further to where the all-day kindergarten is located, they don't get it. And therefore, when faced with that choice, they make the choice to offer it. So again, that's why I said we need to repeat those questions in a survey to just really get the most accurate gauge possible, because parents will express logically, yes, I want my child to go to as close to my home as possible.
Have we or you done any work as to what District 205's capacity currently is? How many kids we could accommodate currently?
I do not have that information. I don't think we're sure of that right now. Dr. Moy, do you?
We have it. It's been part of some of the ongoing work with with the architects and some of the other planning. Several of our schools would have the capacity to accommodate it right now. Some would not. And so what we're trying to do is dovetail the work with the all-day kindergarten research with the polling and the surveys and the future community engagement process and those kinds of things, so that we can work that in to some of the designs and some of the options that the community would weigh. And that would involve whichever specific option people might land on. It would involve needing to have some additional capacity. It's just a matter of what the community wants to support. But does that help?
I assume then at some future date we'll get more details as to how many students each of our schools could accommodate and what the different options would be.
Yes, yes.
A couple questions. One, the 2,000, 3,500, and 4,000, any idea how much of the cost that covered?
They did not. I don't think the people that I talked to that were in charge of implementing know exactly how much that did cover. And obviously, if there's a difference of almost double, it probably didn't cover as much in one district as another. And so how much they absorbed and how much they're able to partial out those costs, I am not sure, because they may not be able to exactly verify how much did this cost,
okay,
and what percentage is it paying.
Okay.
So I understand your question, though. Yeah, that would be nice to know it.
As we get into looking at this, just understanding, if the community paid 100% of it, what would it cost? If they paid 50% of it, what would it cost? To get some idea there. The second question is, if you ask these questions to comparable surrounding grade school districts, what do you think the data would look like?
Again, when you're getting into this area, you've got high-performing districts. You've got some of the best districts in the state, and Illinois is a fairly high-flying state in terms of academic performance relative to the nation. Not the highest, but in probably the top 20%. And so they would also be inclined towards all-day kindergarten because it seems to work. We want our kids to learn as much as possible, and it is hard to say, well, how early do you start them and how much do you give them? I mean, we all face that as parents. But especially in communities where education is particularly valued and high performance is taken as a given, they do, that I would suspect that the majority, if not almost all, would have it. I limited my survey just because I wanted to go in depth to the districts that were basically the most comparable to you, which is these 9.
Sure, but yeah, I understand. I'd just be curious about and it does not surprise me at the macro level that all-day kindergarten is a differentiator for high-performing districts. But it's just, as we talk about implementation options and ways to do it, surrounding communities and how they handle it, because that's who we're competing for residents with when they look at moving out of the city or, moving to Chicago. So it would be helpful to understand beyond just these unit districts. I know Hinsdale's got their model and the different, communities around here as we look at who's got it, how they implemented it, how much do they charge, homeschool versus centralized. A bigger data set would help, I guess is my point.
Yeah, we could, that's always possible. It's just more surveying.
So this, I don't think you would have this information, but and this would probably go more for Mary. But as we look more at all-day kindergarten, I think something that I would like to know more about is what the programs really look like because, the kids are little, and just not cramming more academics down them, but what do those programs look like and who's done it, since we clearly have leaders who've done it before us, what's worked, what hasn't, and you don't necessarily have to answer that now, but just as part of this evaluation process as we look at it.
Sure, I'd be happy to get some mock schedules, not mock, but schedules that other teachers use. I know when we implemented it in our building, after the first year of implementation, my kindergarten teachers came to me and said, we want to have the latest lunch because we find that no matter when the kids eat after lunch, they really, are worn out for academics. And so they would do their specials in the afternoon, and they would do more of their structured play and their social skills, and do most of their academics in the morning. So I can get all kinds of examples for you.
There are a lot of resources available, and I know some of these comparable districts have offered their resources. So.
Okay, we have a recap of the August startup activities. Dave, do you want to kick that off?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, good evening again. Thank you so much, Steve. Appreciate your time tonight and your work. We're going to talk about a couple of our different opening activities in August related to our administrator and teacher work to get the school year off the ground. And the first thing that I'm going to address is our opening administrator academy on August 2nd and 3rd. There were two major pieces to it. One was taking a look at healthy cultures, and we did that by taking a look at the work of Daniel Pink, his book Drive. We watched a TED Talk. We did some things by him. We did some things with relating it to PLCs and culture in our district, and that work is ongoing and will be revisited throughout the year. And then we took a look at that in the context of innovation. We talk about being a national leader in future-ready learning, and we wanted to delve more deeply into what does innovation really mean. And we had a Skype session with a Harvard professor, Michael Tushman, and took a look at his book. And in his book, the concept of innovation is essentially a concept of continually refining what you do well and improving upon it, and capitalizing on it, and then encouraging pilots of innovation and learning from it, where you can learn how to do things that you've never thought were possible, and then when you perfect that, you scale it until it becomes the new norm, and then you kind of continuously improve and innovate and keep that cycle going. And so we tried to combine those concepts into what we're trying to develop here in Elmhurst, which is the idea of being a culture of innovation. And one of the things that we did at that retreat was what we called Ignite presentations, and each of our principals were asked to give a 5-minute presentation on something that they were proud of in their building, innovative and creative ideas that they had tried, and celebrate successes that they have had, and share them with people so that we could learn from each other. And many of them, well, all of them did a really good job, especially because we had never done it before. One of our principals is here tonight to share her Ignite presentation. Michelle Thompson, the Emerson principal, will give you a little bit of a flavor of what those presentations were like. So if you are ready.
Oh, okay, perfect. Hi, good evening. I'm Michelle Thompson, the Emerson principal, the current one. Last time I said it was coming up, but I'm here. We're doing it. So thank you so much for having me here, and here's my Ignite presentation. So one of the ideas that I had coming in was repurposing buddy time. So through meetings with teachers during my transition and early work with my leadership team, it was told to me that some people did buddy time, some people didn't, and so I really wanted to make it a purposeful, meaningful time. And I asked my leadership team to come up with a name because I thought buddy time sounded boring, and so they called it Future Focused Learning Buddies. And why did I feel like we needed to repurpose it? I heard that some teachers were doing buddy time, some teachers weren't doing buddy time, and so I wanted an equal opportunity for all teachers and students at Emerson. I wanted to also kind of utilize this time to try and build in some more collaboration. I also wanted to capitalize on some of that student excitement and motivation to get to work with, cross grade level buddies. For my dissertation research, I'm sorry to get a little nerdy on you with this part, but I read a study that was done in 1975 by Dan Lordy, and he studied hundreds of teachers on the East Coast and why they decided to go into the profession. And one of the things that they said was because they could just go and close their doors and do their job and nobody would bother them. And so it was a culture of going into that for isolation, and that's just not how we work anymore. But when you think about the physical organization of our schools, they're still set up in that cellular, close my door and do my thing in my classroom. And so I wanted to, also come up with some ideas to kind of break down those barriers and just change that mentality. And then the idea was also sparked to me when I went to model schools this summer, and Dr. Daggett talked about those personal skills for future ready students. So I wanted to kind of combine all those things and repurpose my buddy time. So the goals of buddy time for the teachers are to give them an additional monthly team meeting time, which is focused on talking about students and student data and student work. For the students, it's to build relationships and connections across grade level. It's to create leadership opportunities for those older students working with those younger students, and it's also to learn and apply future-ready personal skills. So the logistics. We are a 0.8 school, and so on Wednesdays, we don't have any specials, and so we're using the afternoons on Wednesdays twice a month, and I staggered the time so that they only miss the subject once a month. But on the first week of the month that we do it, the primary teams meet in their professional learning teams, and the intermediate teachers are the host teachers. And I also pushed in extra support so that it's not one teacher with like 40 kids, but they have an extra adult in there. And then on the second week of the month, the intermediate teams get to meet with their PLC teams or their learning teams, and the primary teachers host the students. And all classrooms are partnered with that other class for the whole year. And I had to be creative with my AM Kinder class so that they get they get that buddy time too. But we worked through that with 5th grade. But they get those buddies all year long, and so they really get to form those relationships with those kids. And I worked with my PBIS team to help plan the lessons, because I didn't want it to be something else that was on the teachers to have to plan. And so our PBIS team is working to, we determined a monthly focus, and they're working to create and communicate the lessons for the teachers to use. And we're also focusing throughout the whole month on that future ready skill. And here's the list of skills that we are focusing on. These come from Dr. Daggett. And so you can read all the skills, but in September we decided to focus on respect and responsibility. So last week we had our first future focus buddy time, and the kids loved it. It was so neat when you walked around to see, the older students leading discussions about what does respect look like. They incorporated technology, and it was super exciting. And that was when I was walking around upstairs, and then when I walked around downstairs, I peeked in the rooms, and you could see the teachers having that extra collaborative time. And they were excited. They're like, when's our next buddy time? So next week, if anyone wants to come. And that's my Ignite presentation. Good.
So thank you, Michelle. I know that on our agenda, which I just want to make a note of this, Michelle probably doesn't care, but she doesn't have any letters in front of her name, and that's actually a mistake. She finished her doctorate last spring, so I'll make sure Ellen doesn't do that again to you if you ever come up here again. But so you could see that through creative use of time and sitting down and working collaboratively with her building leadership team, she was able to reinforce a lot of our major goals of the 6 C's, increasing collaboration, and work a lot of things into that. And I just thought that was really impressive on her part to come in here in a couple weeks and work with her people and come up with some things that I think are going to have a very positive impact on students. So thank you, Michelle. At this time, I'm just going to turn it over to Dr. Henderson, and she's going to recap some of the other startup activities for us.
Good evening, everyone. August is actually one of the busiest months that we have in learning and teaching as we get ready to ramp up the year, and there's always quite a bit of professional learning that's going on. So I'm going to give you some of the highlights. So the first part of August, we had our new Educator Academy, and we had approximately 65 participants in our new Educator Academy. So those are for all new certified staff members. This year we really changed up the format of that. We had the learning experiences were more focused on curriculum and instruction and district priorities, and they were primarily facilitated by our instructional coaches, which was a really important idea for a couple of reasons. It helped the new educators get to know the coaches, meet the ones that are in their building, and right away they were able to see that that is a great resource for them. During transitions between different sessions, the coaches would talk to the new teachers about ways that they could work with them. So they started building in that expectation we have that teachers continue to improve themselves, and one of the best ways to do that is through job-embedded learning with our instructional coaches. There was a nice blend. The first day is a lot of district particulars and procedures. We go over evaluation procedures. There's a whole afternoon that is full of presentations by different offices here in the district office talking about absence procedures and the business office and payroll and those types of things. But I thought it was very telling. We do a survey and gather feedback after all of our big learning experiences. And on our day where they spent with the coaches, or really it was a day and a half, there was a 97% approval rate for working with the coaches, and felt like that was beneficial to help them launch their year. Another one of the days, a group of coaches did a half day with them on integrating technology. 94% of the respondents had high approval ratings for that session. And the downside, more negative feedback related around wishing they had more time for the tech integration. So that's great feedback for us to look at as a coaching team when we look at how do we revamp and improve again for next year. Another piece of August learning, I apologize, this is harder to read than I expected. We worked with our middle school leadership. As you know, we've launched a few changes in our middle schools this year. But one of the things that we were focusing on in August were some of the logistical pieces as we put acceleration into place. There were not just curricular pieces, but also the logistics of moving the kids around throughout the day. So I facilitated a half day with all of the team leaders from all 3 middle schools, and really through some discussion and problem solving, they figured out all of the logistics and had those pieces and a plan in place in one half day planning. So they really did a terrific job, but most important, they really felt empowered because they came up with the solutions themselves, and found, little variances between the 3 buildings, but really felt comfortable with the system that they developed. Another piece of our student achievement objectives involves standards-based reporting. So standards-based reporting is part of our balanced assessment system, so that first student achievement objective. And as you'll recall, this year we're doing a pilot at 2 of our elementary schools, Hawthorne and Field. Earlier in the summer, we had one of our consultants come in to work with a district-wide team of teachers on standards-based reporting, but we had a day in August where all of the teachers and staff from Field and Hawthorne were invited to come in for an introduction. And I would say we had about 75% of the staff participate in that, which for an August day when you're trying to cram every last bit of summer into the month was a really great turnout. The principals were very pleased. So the work that the teachers did on that day allowed them to work through the reporting standards for each grade, start to make sense of the proficiency scales, which is almost like a rubric where they'll be evaluating a student's progress on a particular standard, as well as looking at the standards and identifying what do they have in place already that they use in their instruction that would be a source of evidence for mastery of a standard. So they spent a whole day working together and had a great response from that. Our big day in learning and teaching is always that first district-wide Institute Day that took place on August 14th this year. As you can see on this slide, in the morning, we really have a differentiated approach to our morning based on what specific levels need. So for example, at our K-5 buildings this year, we are implementing the Fontes and Pinnell system of assessment for reading. And again, that ties back to both our balanced assessment system as well as our KPI of reading on level by 3rd grade. And this is a brand new assessment for our teachers, so we spent a good deal of the morning introducing them to that system so that they could feel comfortable implementing that in their classroom, which we're just about at the end of the first testing window. So Fontes and Pinnell is a one-on-one assessment between the teacher and the student. It gives teachers a wealth of information about their students' progress in reading, where they're currently performing, where they have strengths, where they have some areas they might need to shore up. Oftentimes teachers report they get much more actionable data from that than even MAP testing or some of the standardized tests. So elementary spent time on that as well as reviewing that introduction to Eureka Math. At Madison, our early childhood center, they really were very focused on getting, again, reviewing their portfolios for assessment, again, tying back to that student achievement objective and getting all the pieces in place they needed to have those portfolios ready to go on day 1. York, because of some freshman work they do on the second Institute Day, this first morning was critically important for them. It was one of the few opportunities they had to have their whole staff together. But again, they worked to strengthen their professional learning communities and then work on course content within their departments. At grades 6 through 8, we had all 3 middle schools come together at Sandburg. They really rotated between 3 sessions. One was within their content area departments, reviewing some of the curriculum compaction or curriculum expansion that had taken place over the summer. They participated in some engagement workshops really tailored to what each teacher felt they needed. And then Dr. Wohl worked with them on our new online evaluation system, helping them get trained in that. And then in the afternoon, all of us participated in the session with Dr. Daggett at York High School. So again, we do staff feedback from days like this, and When asked, or when given the statement, the morning session provided me with important updates and information that will support my work in the 2017-18 school year, 96% of participants responded positively. And when given the statement, Dr. Daggett's presentation was aligned with our district priorities, 93% of our participants responded positively. And I included just a couple of quotes from staff members. Sometimes teachers at the start of the year lose a little bit of focus of what the day is for. Our institute days are days of learning for staff, and some staff want to hold on to that as time to be working in their room, making copies for the start of the year, or getting their classroom set up, and that really represents the bulk of the dissatisfaction in the survey. But again, a 96% satisfaction survey is terrific, as well as we had over 60% of the staff take the survey, which is a percentage that is really tough to get. So we were very pleased with that. But again, we always take this feedback and go back as a learning and teaching department to look at how we can improve even more for next time. Any questions about the start of the year?
We don't usually have questions from the audience, but I think we should do it after the meeting. Thank you. I can talk to you then. Thank you.
This is just kind of random, but when you talked about the engagement workshops, could you just give an example of what one of those was?
So there might have been one on, there was one on Kagan. But some teachers, of course, have participated in workshops and training. So there were some about planning for the block schedule. Again, some teachers have had more experience with that than others. How to use a workshop model in English language arts and in math. So those are just 3 of them that come to mind right away.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
As you know, from Focus 205, we had the community demonstrate a strong opinion that they would like us to pursue enhancing STEM-related opportunities for students. And one of the specific opportunities that resonated at certain points in the discussion is Project Lead the Way. That is a part of STEM. It's not STEM in and of itself. Some people kind of mix that up. It is well, Mark will explain what it is, but it's part of the larger picture of STEM education. And also, as we were visiting middle schools and looking at our middle school programming and how we wanted to look to reorganize our middle school curriculum, every school that we visited offered Project Lead the Way. So Mark is here to explain you a little bit more in detail what that's all about.
Sure. Project Lead the Way is a problem-based STEM curriculum designed to go run the gamut of everything from elementary school all the way up through high school. Originally begun as a high school sort of pre-engineering curriculum, it's grown to encompass biomedical technology as well as computer science. But essentially there are 5 parts to it. There's the launch program, which serves K through 5. At this point in time, we're not planning on rolling that out. I know we've got Define STEM and some other things, some other programs that Dave Beatty and our science teachers have been working with. The Gateway program, which begins in the middle school, which we will be looking at implementing sooner rather than later, and then 3 distinct curricular paths at the high school. Again, pre-engineering, computer science, and the biomedical program. A little bit about Project Lead the Way. It is a nonprofit organization. Its board is made up of current and retired executives from Kodak, Autodesk, GM, Lockheed Martin, and Dow Chemical. Some of their corporate partners are Chevron, Verizon, 3M, Cargill, John Deere, Toyota, the list goes on. You know, for example, the program actually started in Indiana, and there's a Toyota manufacturing facility not far from there, and in that particular plant, if you are a college student looking for an internship, but you have high school Project Lead the Way experience, you are a preferred hire for those college internship programs. It is a foot in the door because of the experiences you get. Project Lead the Way is offered in all 50 states, serves, it's at 10,500 schools throughout the country. 37,000 teachers teach it, and every year there are approximately 2.4 million students in the nation that are enrolled in Project Lead the Way courses. Why is it important? Well, we have a very different career outlook coming up for today's students than we had when we were in school. Over the weekend, I'm not sure if you saw this, but an interior minister in China, which represents 1/3 of the automotive market, has said that they are developing a timetable to eliminate the internal combustion engine from vehicles sold in China to reduce their smog. What does that mean? Well, if you are, let's say, a European auto manufacturer that has no way to right now currently does not have an industry to manufacture batteries for electric vehicles, you're in for a world of hurt if you're about to lose 1/3 of your potential market share. So it's going to rapidly change. Engineering and technology is changing the job market out there. It's sort of changing the balance of power, and we need our kids to be ready. Project Lead the Way has partners in every state with colleges and universities. Those colleges and universities help to provide resources and also the professional development for teachers as they begin their curriculum work. In Illinois, we have the University of Illinois Chicago, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and Benedictine University as Project Lead the Way partners. And so every summer, one of these three or all of these three institutions will host professional development in any one of the different curricular domains. Again, another rationale for Project Lead the Way, STEM careers are here. Just today, if you were looking on Reuters' website, Reuters.com, they had an article today, U.S. job openings at record high, qualified workers scarce. And we want our kids to be ready for those high skill jobs. Our district that works with the International Center for Leadership in Education, and Dr. Dag was just here representing them, and he talked about the rigor relevance framework, where on the vertical axis you have different skills, basic skills to very high cognitive level skills, and on the horizontal axis the application of those skills in limited domains, but then going as you get further to the right, more interdisciplinary, broader, open-ended sort of projects. That's exactly what Project Lead the Way is. We want to get away from a model where a teacher just works relaying basic information, or we relay very high intensity information, very academically intense information, but the student just thinks about it, to one where they actually have to apply it, to one where they actually have to get out and use it, where they're engaged. I showed, as part of our administrator academy, or part of our administrator retreat at the beginning of the year, this slide, and it's based on the work of Teresa Amabile. She's a researcher in creativity. And what she talked about creativity having three basic components: expertise, or knowledge in your subject area, having imagination, and then also being motivated to work on the project that you have in front of you, or motivated to solve the problem that's in front of you. We do a great job of expertise. Expertise is something we are very, very good at. We are very good at relaying information to students. Our students perform well in ACT, SAT, all those measures of college readiness. But using their imagination in science class, when you think about imagination in science class, it doesn't necessarily jump out at you as those two things going together. But being curious, being able to collaborate with one another so that your ideas get added to somebody else's ideas and you have a more powerful than product at the end. But then also being engaged to solve a problem that means something to you, works on that intrinsic motivation, gives you a reason to think about. When we read Drive by Daniel Pink, igniting a student's passion, but also their sense of play and a sense of purpose at what they're doing is important, that what they're doing makes a difference. I'm just going to show a brief video kind of highlighting some of the experiences that some students in Project Lead the Way have had.
Maybe it goes like this from far away. Oh, might be a lever. I'll get it. These are connected, and then it connects to the battery. I like working on robotics and using mechanical arms and robotics and all at the same time, trying to get them to talk together. learning problem-solving skills that Project Lead the Way curriculum teaches you is going to help you in whatever field that you go through.
You're working on something huge and you're making a huge impact.
When you walk into a PLW classroom, what you find is tremendous excitement and passion, not only from the teachers, but from students.
Project Lead the Way is great in that there's so much hands-on. Every activity we do gives the kids the chance to have a more in-depth understanding.
With like your biology class, you kind of hit certain points, but then with the biomedical classes, you go more in depth with diseases and heart functions and body functions.
Project Lead the Way has 5 programs, all of which are designed to prepare students for post-secondary education and careers in the global economy. Launch is for students in kindergarten through 5th grade, designed to capture their interest in and spark a lifelong passion for math and science. Our Gateway program for students in 6th through 8th grade is a series of 9-week units that continues to engage students' natural curiosity and problem solving and shows them the relevancy of math and science in their lives. And we have 3 high school programs. The engineering program is a series of 4-year courses that gives students a deeper look at the engineering design process and teaches them to think critically, solve problems, and to collaborate. In our biomedical science program, students explore human medicine, public health, human body systems, and medical careers. And finally, our computer science program, which is designed to build student interest and engagement in computer science, develop computational thinking skills, and explore topics like programming, data mining, and cybersecurity. When we think of the STEM pipeline, in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, it's clear across our nation that we have a shortage.
This is where the jobs are. This is where the future is. There's a national interest. There's a national security interest. There's just a ton of reasons to get better at science, technology, engineering, and math.
We want students to understand that when they leave high school or they go into college or post-secondary education, they go to the workplace, they're not going to find themselves isolated and as single problem solvers, but rather as group problem solvers.
They're not given a textbook answer. There's not a textbook lab to follow. They really have to think.
Okay. Rather than, I didn't want to show you the whole 5-minute video. You can watch that later if you want. But Project Lead the Way is based on activity, project, and problem-based education. Activities are great to introduce a concept, give the kids kind of an initial practice. Projects are something you work on where there's sort of a defined goal, but problems then are open for the students to work on and come up with their own unique solutions. For example, in the civil engineering curriculum, which is part of the high school engineering curriculum, some of the activities include learning about residential design, design of residential buildings, and then doing a cost and efficiency analysis. But later on, they get to do a project. So they'll go into some aspects of commercial buildings and look at site considerations for traffic, for utilities, stormwater runoff, things of that nature. And then the final project, the culminating project in that course, is to design a small commercial facility in their own area. So it's going to look unique at York versus any other high school in the Chicagoland area. The products could be very, very different. They'll have to identify a need, investigate a site based on available parcels in the area, develop a preliminary design with a site plan, and then present it for critique. So it is a very practical project, something that is relevant to them in their own communities. Assessment of Project Lead the Way projects, they're very supportive with this curriculum. They're more simple activity-based, or even just their basic proficiency assessments are graded very, very quickly, but a lot of the assessments are done in the form of logs, notebooks, portfolios, or projects where the rubrics are provided by Project Lead the Way. The advantage we have is that we have, millions of people around the country that are using the same curriculum, using these same assessments, and so they're reliable and they are valid. Additionally, a lot of the assessments also are consulted with through their industry partners in the different areas, so there are reflections of industry best practices in the assessments that the students use. Again, we talked a little bit about the Gateway, I mentioned the Gateway program earlier. There are 10 different units to choose from. We're looking to implement 2 units per year at the middle school. So out of those 10, we'll be looking at some options. We have not yet selected the 6 units for the 3 courses that we'll be offering in grades 6 through 8. We'll be looking for teachers that are interested in teaching Project Lead the Way, because it does not require a particular certification. It doesn't require that a teacher is a science teacher or a CTE teacher or a computer science teacher. Those things are, that professional development is embedded in the Project Lead the Way program. It's part of the cost of getting the program off the ground. We have a variety of different ways to go. There are computer science and biomedical and also engineering components to this, so we can take it in any direction we want. We're going to be actually conducting some site visits with some of our certified staff. Some of our, I know Linda Fehrenbacher from Sandburg is interested in this, Dave Beatty, myself, and then some teachers who are interested in the program will be going out and visiting gateway sites, middle schools that offer Project Lead the Way over the next couple of months, and kind of narrowing down what works for us based on the curriculum we currently offer. The same is true with the high school. Aaron DeLuga and I have talked quite a bit about looking at what courses would line up the best for us. In fact, just last week, William Barnum and I had an opportunity to talk. He is the computer science teacher at York, talking about the computer science pathways. The engineering pathways, we want to make sure we're not overlapping with the manufacturing program that they're currently putting together at York, but maybe we might go in a little bit different direction with the engineering. Biomedical science is also something I think will have a tremendous amount of interest at York. The curriculum can get very, very rigorous. An example in the medical interventions course, which is designed to be a third-year course, but it involves a fictitious family where you'd end up diagnosing 3 different members of the family and working them through illnesses, infections. One falls ill due to infection, has permanent damage, talks about a treatment plan. A second member of the family is diagnosed with cancer. You get into, and so the curriculum covers genetic screening, again, treatment, and then eventually working through prosthesis fittings after an amputation. And finally, another member of the family, and this is all built into the curriculum, it has type 1 diabetes, falls ill, has to have an organ replacement. And then finally, the course wraps up with talking about all of the ethical issues involved in these processes and the different questions that you have to ask yourself when treating a patient with these different conditions. It's very different than what you would consider to be a traditional anatomy physiology course where you're memorizing bones and insertions for tendons and muscles. This is a much more of a practical application of what it is the students are expected to know. Project Lead the Way does have a relationship with the College Board and with AP. For example, the Computer Science A course that's offered through Project Lead the Way also is endorsed by the College Board for AP credit, so that students can sit for the AP exam after taking the Project Lead the Way course. Additionally, there are also pathways where students can earn basically a certificate of advanced study in STEM education by taking certain AP courses and certain Project Lead the Way courses. 2 of one of the other. So if you take, for example, a couple of the engineering Project Lead the Way courses and then follow it up with an AP chemistry or an AP statistics or an AP calculus, that the College Board then recognizes that as being a student who is advanced in their STEM education. That is actually relatively new and that's developing. Timeline for implementation, we're looking this year to start building curriculum and capacity to launch the first year of middle school gateway curriculum in the fall of 2018. So we're going to be working on 2 units, getting staff trained. That'll take place over the summer and getting those programs in place. In 18-19, we'll develop year 2 of the middle school curriculum and begin working on pathway selection and curriculum development for York. Year 3, 2019-2020, will be implementation of the pathways at York and then of the curriculum at York during the launch, whatever pathways we select, and then finishing up year 3 of the middle school curriculum. Just as an aside, the gateway units will cost anywhere between $15,000 and $20,000, but that will cover all 3 middle schools, equipment, professional development, and membership and any associated fees. So it's all wrapped together in one package. You're not going out and buying materials, buying textbooks, sending to people to PD. It's all part of one project. So that cost will be then every year for 3 years, and then we've completed the middle school. The high school pathways are a little bit different. The computer science is very inexpensive to implement because there's not a lot of equipment to purchase. It's essentially just your professional development and a few licenses. So that 4 years of the program for computer science is a total of $18,000. It really is not bad considering that's 4 courses off the ground in a very intense area. The biomedical and engineering pathways are a little bit more expensive. They're about $25,000 for each level of Project Lead the Way, $25,000, $30,000 for each level that you implement. So our next steps, again, we're going to be working with middle school, looking for teachers that want to teach the program. We've already had some interest at several of our middle schools and trying to narrow down who it would be that would jump into this curriculum. We're going to begin conducting site visits. The Illinois State Project Lead the Way Conference, I know they have a meeting in November and a meeting in March. I'm working on dates for that. It's not currently online yet, so I don't know that they've been actually firmed up. Teacher training will take place this summer in 2018, and then we'll begin probing student interest in the pathways at York, looking at polling some students and seeing what they might be interested in taking. Any questions?
This is great. Thanks, Mark. This is really good. I just want to say, and I'm going to date myself with this, but thank you for the Sputnik moment about China giving up the internal combustion engine. All right. It sounds like a great thing. I think just my reaction is that not only does it respond to the future challenges that we heard about with Bill Daggett, but it really dives into the whole engagement thing that we're pursuing this year. And so I think it's a good thing. Just some logistical questions about this. At the middle school, is the intention to fit this into acceleration time or into the classes, the 75-minute classes? I mean, what will this possibly look like in the middle school?
This will be one of the 40-minute elective periods that the students have.
Okay.
So right now the middle school box is full. You know, you already have a full offering of classes. So with the implementation of Project Lead the Way, it's going to become a choice. And in place of that would be either at the 6th grade level, the students would take, music is still band, orchestra, choir. You have world language. You have PE that's in there, but then you have the wheel. If a student chooses not to do band, orchestra, choir, which we're looking at putting in the school day, or a language, then they would have room for Project Lead the Way. I'm sorry, they would have room for the wheel and then Project Lead the Way after that. Once they're done in 6th grade, they would take the wheel once in 6th grade. Once they get to 7th grade, again, if they're not doing music or a language, they could take Project Lead the Way, or we're also looking at developing other electives, full semester electives in our career and tech, family, consumer science areas. To try and get the kids, instead of a light exposure for just a few weeks and then moving on to the next area, diving in a little bit deeper so they can explore these areas in a little more depth.
Do you think the future of education is to have this sort of thing replacing those, as you say, the full basket that we have at middle school, those 5 courses that we're so familiar with?
I think that the beginning of the exploration of interest is really is what drives student engagement. I think that in order for a student to really be committed to what it is that they're doing, there needs to be some sort of drive behind it. We have some very STEM-focused students right now that aren't being served by some of the things that we offer, and this will give them a chance to dive in a little bit deeper and really explore those things that are of interest to them.
I would actually add, too, that considering the fact that the vast majority of the middle schools already have it, that I think the answer to that would be yes, that's becoming a standard part of the curriculum and people are figuring out a way to accommodate that.
Just a couple of questions about the high school. There's a lot going on there, and it's kind of a full basket, too. We've got the college credit courses that we've been promoting the last couple of years. We've got this hunger for AP among our students. And I was glad to hear you talk about these, coordination of these things with the AP. And perhaps this might be the option that takes people off this, abject pursuit of AP that may or may not be a good thing. But if you could talk a little bit more, and I know you've got a few years off to coordination, but what would it look like in terms of, this full basket at the high school? How would it get done? And maybe you can answer this, Dave. What does it look like in these other high schools that are adopting it?
Well, Mark, did you have it in your district?
We did not.
Okay, so Erin, they had that at Wheeling, so she's very familiar with it. I had it at my previous 2 districts at the high school there. Those just had the engineering curriculum, I believe, and that capstone course was articulated so that a lot of colleges accepted that as the intro to engineering credit. But it's an elective that students choose to take, and so if they're interested in that, they take that instead of taking something else, is what it basically boils down to.
And I don't see this replacing AP in a student's schedule. I mean, there's always going to be a place for that challenge. I see this as complementing it. You're learning very high-level information in your AP classes and then turning around and being able to apply it, and actually get your hands dirty.
So could you just explain why this isn't integrated into the, let's say, normal science curriculum, for instance? Like, why is it its own separate course?
Sure. Well, there are standards that are embedded in the science curriculum, things that are sort of expected. If we have next generation science standards, there are cross-cutting concepts, there are all kinds of sort of mandates, if you will, or things that students take as part of a core curriculum. This is designed to take it just another step further, beyond the minutes that you would actually have in a science classroom. None of these courses are designed to replace the information that will be transmitted from, to a student in biology or chemistry. These aren't traditional courses in the fact that there's not this is the application of information. And so those two kind of work together. You have your classes that are a little more traditional, that inform students and ask them to work, basically kind of, these are more quadrant B, if you will, courses that we're looking to augment with now activities to go out and then apply. So, I think there would be, it's in the sort of the sandwich of a high school education. You can't get rid of the bread just to have just the meat. I guess if you're in the South Beach diet, you could, but you want to make sure you have sort of a balance between the curriculum that students also are, colleges are expecting students to have when they leave high school, but then these other hands-on opportunities which give kids a chance to explore, dive in, and use their creative minds to problem solve.
Yeah, I think Mark makes a good point there. We're not necessarily trying to do away with foundational knowledge. We're trying to extend that into another realm. But at the same time, there are schools that have adopted integrated science curricula, and there are practical reasons too why more schools or I guess why the science curriculum isn't already incorporating some of this stuff. And that's the Carnegie units. There are state requirements, there are things that colleges accept. And so I think the real world wants schools to do more of this kind of stuff, so we're fighting that balancing act between all of these competing things that are floating around out there.
So we were just talking about balance, and I'm going to go back to the middle school. And I know you mentioned that this would be one of the electives. So what might your response be to some of those families that might be concerned that we're cannibalizing the existing groups and steering them away from some of these other electives, such as the choir, band, orchestra, and/or language? What might a response be to that question?
That's a great question. I was a music student myself. If I had to make the same choices when I was in middle school, I would have chosen band. because that was something that was important to me. That was also where my peer group was. But I was also a science student. Language probably wouldn't have been at the top of my list. And that doesn't mean that for some other folks it's not very, very important. But to say that we wouldn't change anything because we have a box and we're very, very happy with what's in the box is difficult. They're all very important. Math is very important. Science is very important. Social science is very important. ELA is very important. And we're all competing for those same, 300 minutes in a middle schooler's day. So unfortunately, you can't add something without taking something off the plate. It's just like a budget or anything else. So in looking for ways to implement this priority to the community, then there have to be trade-offs. It's not, and that's for every child with their families to decide what it is that they would like to pursue, and again, explore interests. Middle school, high school, these are chances for kids to explore something, and maybe they say they don't like it, and then they move in a different direction. But this is a chance for them to kind of, dive in and pursue things that are of interest to them and draw them in to school, that make them engaged.
I'm going to start out with reiterating Margaret's question in maybe a different way. But that is a concern of mine as well. I mean, our students who are interested in world languages, we do live in a global economy, and that economy, that globe is getting smaller every day. And understanding another culture's language is more important every day, as well as music. And our highest performing students tend to have an interest in both world language and music. Can I make a couple of suggestions? Either we think about ways to accommodate through an optional longer day to accommodate these kind of things like Project Lead the Way, or in both middle school and high school, offering these as summer options. These are great, engaging classes that kids would be interested in expanding their set of experiences during summer. So let me just ask you to explore that option as well.
Sure. And we will look into that. We'll look in all of our options. And I will tell you, for my own son in middle school, we made the choice music and language. It was important to him. He had an interest in Spanish, and once he got into it, he absolutely loved it. He's a freshman now in high school. He started in Spanish 2. And it's my intention for him to finish through Spanish 5 and get a seal of biliteracy, because I do believe in the importance of having a second language, being versed in it. It's something I wish I had taken more of when I was in school, because and certainly the younger you learn it, the better off that language is going to stick with you. So I agree 100%. I'm not trying. This is there are a lot of tough decisions to be made here when it comes to middle school scheduling and trying to get more. Get more in without taking anything out. Our kids today put a lot on their plate, and they end up getting a lot of anxiety sometimes about the amount of stuff that they're expected to do and learn in school. So there's always a fine balancing act.
And that's why I bring up the summer option, because that is a great way to explore something that maybe you wouldn't normally explore, is take a few weeks in the summer to do so. And my last question is, how long has Project Lead the Way been around?
Project Lead the Way has been around since the 80s.
Yeah, so.
The exact year, I want to say like 82, 84, but I'd be making something up then. So,
Yeah.
But I know it's been around since the 1980s.
So it's something I learned about soon after I joined the school board. So I just want to say thank you to you and to our administration for finally bringing this to District 205.
I have a quick question too. Maybe this is for Mary. I heard, maybe it's in the spring, that at the middle school, you could take 2 years of Spanish rather than 3 and still end up in Spanish 2 freshman year. So that could free up some time. You could take 2 years and have 1 year of an elective, maybe like Project Lead the Way.
You're correct. So students will have the option of not taking a language in middle school. They'll have the option of starting in 7th grade and taking it in 7th and 8th, and then starting high school at level 2. Or they'll have the option of starting in 6th grade, taking it 6th, 7th, and 8th, and then starting high school at level 3.
So I have several questions. One, I'll start with this one, which is, I know that some colleges require world language.
Yes.
So are we looking at making sure that we can accommodate students that can get their world language requirement, or, the content and the knowledge, in order to apply to the schools that they would like to, that have a world language requirement minimum?
Yeah, highly selective universities will generally want to see at least 4 years. And so absolutely, there are going to be those, if a student is looking at a highly selective university, that's going to be a must.
The difference will be we may have more students starting at year 1 in high school. Any years taken in middle school don't count toward that college requirement. So the only implication for our high school is that we may have some freshmen starting at level 3, but we also may have some starting at level 1, which also happens when we have students who decide to take Mandarin or Italian, some language other than French or Spanish, which are the only 2 we offer in middle school.
Okay, so it leads to a bigger question that I have. So my kids are out of the district, although I'm just thinking about a parent going through it. And we are offering so much to them. What is our thoughts and planning for helping parents, students first off, understand all of this and understand at their levels of middle school as well as high school, of how they make these decisions? Because as a parent, to help your children learn how to make their own decisions, like what we're trying to do with critical thinking and, applying all this, how do we guide them on it? I remember when my oldest went to high school, I said, the world is your oyster. This is wonderful. How do you, so he was overwhelmed with, how do I manage through it and make sure that I make the right decisions? And so I just feel as though there's even more. It's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I went through high school in 3 years because of this sort of stuff, got hired at 19 at Bell Labs. It's the science whole thing. And that was 30-some years ago, people. So I'm with Jim. It's wonderful that we're getting it here in District 205. But as a parent and as helping our students, how will we guide them in this where they're not going to know what they don't know? And I feel as though it's our job to help counsel and guide them, to let them know what's there, how you can manage through it, what's your fork in the roads that, pathways and forks in the roads. You have to make critical decisions.
So one of the things that we will need to work with our middle school principals on is the timing and the structure of how they communicate with 5th grade parents. Because currently there's not a lot of option when they go to select classes. So with all of these options available, meetings that typically have been taking place in April and May really need to be moved up much earlier in the year so that they can talk through and be available to help parents understand all of the options that are available to them. So that's definitely one piece. And I think helping parents understand that while the choices they make are locked in for a year, it doesn't lock them in for all of middle school. And so we want to help kind of relieve some of that anxiety. Like you've signed up to do something, that doesn't mean it's a life sentence for all of middle school. You can have some options. If you get into that rigorous 3-year language program and you're finding that's really just too much, then we have to help them find a way to re-navigate and kind of reset the next year.
And then going on to the high school, when you jump in and have all of those electives options, that's again where Aaron DeLuga, Ryan Doherty has been working to try and put courses in a pathway so that if maybe I want to go into business. I'm a freshman, I'm looking into going into business. Well, then here are some electives that we recommend for you as you have these electives built in your schedule that will set you up well and give you a good foundation for college a college business program, whether it's getting into making sure you have the math requirements to go into business calculus, making sure you have some accounting, some personal finance classes to get you towards business. Same thing with engineering, same thing with the biomedical. So we're in the process of trying to generate these pathways and recommended courses for parents so they can kind of see all that York has to offer.
To your point.
And the other thing that I thought, and I understand, Karen, the challenge with making so many decisions, and
Understanding how to.
Well, yes, and I think this is precisely kind of what Dr. Daggett was talking about. Like, there's so much information coming in, and I think that it's scary because I'll say in my generation, if you were an accountant, you were an accountant always. You were an accountant, and you figured that out, and many people learned that and stayed that path. That was the norm. I don't think, the way I understand this future to be, that's going to be the norm. So this is, kind of example. You might start off and think you are passionate 100% in science, and go 3 years and decide, I love it, but it's my hobby. I really am passionate in creative arts. So I think it's going to be hard as a community to get used to the idea that students will change their mind about their interests, definitely about their career path. And I think this is just helping people get ready and getting prepared, exploring different options and being very comfortable changing when we decide another option suits us better.
Yeah, to Karen's point as well, I think York does a great job of having the parents of 8th graders in the spring before they start their freshman year, and explaining each of the departments and what the options are and what the pathway looks like. And after this discussion, it's kind of becoming obvious that the middle schools need to start doing this before 5th grade, because there are so many options, with an emphasis of this. Middle school and high school are a kid's opportunities to explore different things and not get locked in a particular track, but never again will they have the opportunity to explore so many different things and see what interests them and see what ignites their passions. And the more opportunities we can get for kids to have those experiences, the better off our community is.
All right, so I agree with Jim with offering some of this stuff in the summer. I think that would be fabulous for students. And then I also have a question about, so when you said middle school at the gateway level, that we need additional teachers to teach this, does that mean in addition to the teachers that we already have?
No, they'll come from our current teachers. They'll come from our current teachers, where we're looking for teachers that have an interest that want to take this on, because this is not a curriculum that requires a certification in a particular area. You do not need to be a science teacher or a CTE teacher to teach the Project Lead the Way curriculum. They train you in that curriculum. So what we'd like to have are folks that are interested in sort of taking on the challenge and going through the PD, and we've already had some people volunteering, coming up to their principals and saying that, well, I'd like to be a part of this. So we do have that interest, and it'll just be, once we have student numbers, kind of who's interested in the program, they'll determine how many staffing and all that other kind of good stuff. So then it'll go through our normal schedule process.
Okay, so I guess that's what I was trying to visualize. So that instructor or those instructors will then, that's what they do for XYZ periods instead of some other content area. That's
Correct.
How it's going to work. Okay. I think that's it.
So just more about the professional development, what's the time commitment, or what does it look to get a teacher trained? What does it
Between
look like?
3 and 5 days. Generally, they're held Many of them are at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So that includes, they go down for a few days, they have housing, they work through some of the projects, they get some of the same hands-on experiences that the kids do, and then they're good. Once they're trained, they're good to go. If there are curricular updates, they're generally sent out via email. There are some courses where the training is online, but not many.
So if a teacher's trained, then that would be the only teacher that can teach that in a building. So would you train more than one, or you know what I mean?
Sure. Again, yeah, everybody that would teach that curriculum would have to go through the Project Lead the Way training. So we would have to make sure that there was a teacher in each building that was trained in that process.
And then I got one. So do you feel like, based on, you've seen this in action, do you feel like it opens learning or maybe excitement for learning for kids who maybe aren't so naturally excited about school? We talk about AP and, that just, I don't know, I guess there's those kids that maybe need a jump start to see what's exciting or what could be or what's possible. So do you feel like it opens doors for kind of all kinds of learners, or is it just more your super high achieving learners?
I think that the answer to that is twofold. At the middle school, what we want to have is more exposure to these careers, because we do want to break the traditional sort of gender stereotypes, the stereotypes of what it is to be an engineer, what it is to be a computer scientist, what it is to be a biomedical researcher. We want to make sure that we're exposing students to this as early as possible, so that they don't get that stuck in their head that it's not cool to do this, or I should be doing something else. But at the high school level, the high school the high school district I was previously at did not have Project Lead the Way. We had a course called Engineering Physics. It was more of a project-based class. But even when I taught AP Physics, I would have kids that, after the AP exam, they wanted to build their Rube Goldberg machines and stuff like that, and really just kind of dive in it and start doing the math and working things out, and going in and drawing up these designs, putting them on paper, building a mock-up, testing it. If it fails, trying again. The cardboard boats in the pool, all that kind of stuff. They enjoyed the challenge, and this is that opportunity to kind of dive in and let them really explore and go through this process, but do so in a way which is, they're scaffolded through the process of what it's like to, actually put something together, put it to trial, get feedback, go back, refine it again, and basically become an engineer, become a problem solver.
All right. One last thing. I'm just echoing a lot of the sentiment here. The mixture between, our world-class fine arts program, and I would love to see our STEM program achieve the same status, but not at the expense of the other one. And fully encourage finding ways to allow kids to take as much of this as possible. I will throw out that I do understand that the recent legislation offered us some mandate relief that may allow some flexibility in our days as well for certain kids, and looking at that as a potential option to allow them to fill their day with another course that really interests them. I would encourage you guys to look at that as another way to try to broaden the access to it.
Anything else? Thanks.
We have one item on the consent agenda. Would any board member like to remove the item from the consent agenda? Okay, then I need a motion.
I move that we approve the personnel report.
I second.
Okay, moved by John, second by Karen. Go ahead.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes, that's 7 ayes, no nays. That motion passes. Welcome, Kate, to the Communications Department. Do you want to say a few words?
Well, with this vote, we have just hired Kate Alt to be our new communications coordinator. Kate is actually coming to us from Springfield, Missouri, where she is a TV news reporter. She has a degree in journalism from Bradley University. She graduated magna cum laude, so she's a smart gal. And we think she's going to really add some nice skills and abilities to the communications office. I know she's going to be able to help us do some video packaging and things that we're going to need for Focus 205 Phase 2, and so that's going to be really great, and we look forward to her joining us probably around October 2nd. So thank you very much.
Okay, state budget. Oh, excuse me, sorry. Superintendent action item.
City Manager Jim Grabowski called me and asked if the district would be interested in joining the O'Hare Noise Compatibility Commission. I reached out to the board. The board agreed that it would be appropriate to pass a resolution to join the commission to support the citizens on the north side of town who have expressed concern with the disruptions caused by the test flight patterns in the current pilot program. Therefore, there is a resolution on the agenda tonight. Approval is recommended.
Just something I need to take care of. This was originally proposed as joining the ONCC, and I didn't see any problem with that at all. But when I looked at the agenda item on Friday, I realized it was an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Chicago. In full disclosure, I have a law practice in which I represent the City of Chicago, so I called our board's attorney and asked for an opinion as to whether I have a conflict of interest on this item. He has given me a legal opinion that I don't have a conflict of interest, and therefore I don't have a legal obligation to disclose or recuse myself. But I think I'm going to do it anyway for the following reasons. In the interest of transparency, which we all feel is essential for the board doing its work, I would just need to disclose that I've got a law practice. I represent the City of Chicago. I do not represent the Department of Aviation in any of their projects, and that's who this agreement is with. I do work on highway, bridge, and railroad projects for other departments of the city, the Department of Planning and Development, the Department of Transportation. Those are all ground-based forms of transportation. So even though our attorney says I don't have to disclose or recuse, I think it's a good idea since we're dealing in public confidence, and I think it's always better to err on the side of transparency and caution and make sure that nobody really misunderstands what's happening. So in the interest of transparency and avoiding any misunderstanding, even though our attorney has not told me that they don't have a conflict, I'm going to, I've disclosed and I will recuse.
Okay.
Oh, before I do, can I thank Kara for stepping up? Thanks.
Okay, I need a motion. Go ahead.
I move that the Board of Education adopt the resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement between Elmhurst School District 205 and the City of Chicago for the district's membership and participation on the O'Hare Noise Compatibility Commission, or what you've heard a lot of tonight, the ONCC.
Second.
I second.
Okay, moved by Karen, second by Margaret. Any discussion? Kara?
So, my neighborhood is very upset. We've been hearing the planes a lot. I did go on Friday to the ONCC meeting to see what it was about. Basically, we, along with 17 other districts, can have a seat at the table to advocate for our kids and in our community. And so it seems like there isn't a reason for us not to participate. And so I've said I'd be willing to sit on the committee. That's it.
Yeah, because this is the time we should say something. And I know that Dr. Moyer articulated that when the city manager, Jim Grabowski, called us, Dave reached out to us, and we are taking the action. So this is the first board meeting since that phone conversation, and so I just want everyone to understand that, as always, we are cooperating on the best interest for our students and our community. And so thank you, Kara, for stepping up. And I think this is a good thing for us to do. I certainly hope that we can make an impact with votes in time to moving from test to a permanent runway here.
Comments? This is a roll call. Go ahead.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes, that's 6 ayes, no nays. That motion passes.
So tonight I have one thing, since the state did pass a budget, we're going to give you, it's very complicated. Not everybody even knows exactly what it's all going to mean yet, but Chris is going to do his best to summarize for us what some of this might mean for Elmhurst.
Right, Senate Bill 1947, the Evidence-Based Funding for Student Success Act. A few days after the law was passed, I attended a webinar for an hour and a half, 37 slides. I'm going to try and do it a little shorter and a little fewer slides. But the purpose of this bill was to provide equitable funding to both low-income and low property wealth districts. It's to fund the neediest districts first, and to have a formula that is evidence-based practice or practices where research shows that enhance students' achievement in the classroom, and no districts should lose money. So that's really what this bill was all about. The first part about it, the first part of the formula is determining adequacy, and the adequacy is how much does providing a high-quality education cost. The formula is based on 27 essential cost elements, and they are all these are all based on enrollment, enrollment in the needs of the students, and these 27 essential elements, they come up with an FTE based on these elements, and then they take the FTE and multiply it by an average salary, and the salary average is then adjusted for regional wage differences. This adequacy target will be calculated by the State Board of Ed. We don't have that yet. We won't have it for a few weeks. What I've seen is a simulation done by the State Board of Ed in May of similar formula for Senate Bill 1. But what this bill does is it compares the adequacy target to local capacity target. And local capacity is the property taxes plus the corporate personal property replacement taxes. That's the local capacity target plus your base funding minimum. And the base funding minimum is what we received this year in general state aid, which was the $3.4 million, and then these mandated categorical programs. So currently our base fund minimum is the $6,298,427. So that is the total resources. The property taxes and corporate personal replacement taxes and the base fund minimum. They compare that to this adequacy target. And that's where we get the percent of adequacy. What percent of adequacy are you? In the simulation that I saw in May, we were 108 or 109% actually was where we were in the May calculation. We were at 109%, so we were above the adequacy target. So in this it says for this year, the base fund minimum is last year's allotments and these things, and then for next year, the base fund minimum is the prior year base fund minimum plus the EBM distributions. The EBM, that's evidence-based model distributions, that has to do with the tiers. which is this, the tiers is where the neediest school districts are funded first. 50% of the new dollars will go to the tier 1, and then 49% will go into tier 2, and then tier 3 gets 0.9%, and tier 4 gets 0.1%, and that's where we are, 0.1%. So we're not going to get, in this simulation, we got $1.22 per student, a little less than $10,000 was our EBM in the May simulation. So we're basically, EBM, evidence-based model, is this tiering, and it's all based on your adequacy percentage. So just in case you're interested, Wheaton 200 is a tier 3, 90% in the simulation. Naperville 203 was 120%, tier 4. Indian Prairie was 81%, tier 2. Elmhurst 109%, tier 4. Batavia was 91%, tier 3. St. Charles 102%, tier 4. Geneva was 100%, tier 4. Barrington was 123%, tier 4. So Wheaton 200 at tier 3, we're at like $25.98 per pupil. Indian Prairie in tier 2 was $30.88 per pupil. Batavia was $24.82 per pupil in tier 3. So in the 8 districts, there are 5 tier 4s, including us, 2 tier 3s, Wheaton and Batavia, and then Indian Prairie is tier 2. I don't know if you all were interested, but how we kind of compare with our comparatives in this adequacy target, but that's what that is. So that kind of explains the funding. Other provisions, we have the mandate relief that was referenced earlier, which allows the school board to determine the frequency of PE as long as it is a minimum of 3 days for a 5-day week, and it allows school district to exempt on a case-by-case basis 7th through 12th grade students who participate in sports, and it allows districts to contract with a third party for driver's ed, and provides a streamlined process for mandated waivers. And then other provisions, the voter-initiated referendum. This allows 10% of voters in the district above 110% of adequacy to petition for a referendum. In the amendatory veto bill, which included the TIF properties, we were 111%. So that difference with the TIF properties put us above the 110%. We were at 111. So that's that. And then this, it also has this tax credit scholarship program for private schools. And then this is what will be provided to us by the State Board of Ed when they do their calculations. I think they're talking about another 2 or 3 weeks before we start seeing the only number I'm not sure what it is this real receipts percentage. I'm not exactly sure what that is. I talked about the percentage of adequacy, the local capacity target, adequacy target, the base fund minimum. So net contribution target, all that information will be coming from the state. This is now requirements that we will have to do for transparency, spending plan. So that's really the bill. Guess what else do I have to say about it? There was a question about Chicago. It treats students in Chicago the same way it treats students in every other district in the state by getting rid of block grants and reconciling pension payments. That was part of the webinar. 80% of districts in Illinois are funded below adequacy. So therefore, new funding is required to get to adequacy, but no district should lose money. 85% of all dollars go to districts with greater than 50% low income, and almost 70% of all dollars go to districts with lower than median property wealth. Chicago Public Schools receives about 20% of the new formula dollars. It has about 19% of the state's students and 1/3 of its low-income students. Okay?
So net that out for us. We are not getting any new dollars.
Well, $1.22 per pupil, which is a little less than $10,000 in the simulation that was done in May.
And we may not get anything more than that in the foreseeable future, as Jim's saying, ever. So that's what's important for our community to know. This is what our legislators voted on.
Tier 4, which is like 0.1%.
And I understand that you and I
any new dollars.
understand what this means, but it's important for us to say, money's going to be even tighter than it is now. We have facilities who needs multi-million dollars, everything's going up, and it is less money in the pie, bottom line. And I think that's important for us to share here. So the clarifying question that I had was twofold. At the end, you talked about the block grant for Chicago. Clarify what was meant by your statement, or the information you've got.
Well, I'm not an expert. I didn't write this bill. I'm just trying. I watched a webinar.
Correct, and I did not. And it's important.
I watched and listened, and I tried to make it as concise as I could of how it applies to our district.
And we want students to be educated everywhere. We wouldn't volunteer for this position if it weren't the case. But it's important for everyone to understand kind of what's going on, and are those students really going to be educated any better based on giving them 3-digit million more dollars, okay? So what this bill did was said that that all of Illinois is now going to pay for the Chicago pensions, which once again, I think the last I heard was $250 million. So that's what is happening. Okay? And the block grant that Chicago had, several pieces of information that we need to know and communicate. This is how decisions are being made. Is that the data is from 1975 at the most recent of the students that they utilized to get the funding. And there was a lot of push to say, get real data so that we can really allocate the right dollars to the students in the state, specifically in Chicago. So it sounds as though they're getting that money still, and we are going to also take into account their pension. And so what I want to make sure is, are we in the bill? I'm sure, I haven't heard it anywhere, I don't know if you have, but how are they going to hold districts accountable to increasing the academic achievement for these students that are getting these hundreds of millions of dollars? That's what's important for us to understand and know and advocate for.
And I apologize. I missed that. I missed where, and I know, to me, the challenge is, the focus is, we are Elmhurst, okay? And how is this going to impact Elmhurst? And what are we going to do? And I think it's always easy, and it's always tempting to talk about someone else is getting something different, better, newer, but that's not within our scope of influence. It's maybe a concern, but it's not in our scope of influence. And so I think, thank you for the information that you provided us, Chris, about how this is going to impact Elmhurst. How are we going to make adjustments as needed? And if we need to petition differently on what Elmhurst, and I don't mean Elmhurst, because we include more than Elmhurst. We include, obviously, Addison, Bensonville, and portions of Oak Brook in addition to Elmhurst. If we need to petition differently what our community needs, then I think that's what our strategy should really focus on, is how are we going to make our community the best and reach its potential.
Margaret, I just preliminarily, without, a precise answer to that, which would take a lengthy period of time in which we don't exactly have, the general answer is that I believe it's really important that people understand that we have to build sustainability into our planning process so that we can allocate resources to where we get the best impact for kids, and we can do it as efficiently as possible so that we don't ever get to a point where we have to make cuts solely for budgetary reasons, where we're cutting things just to balance a budget, where we actually are not doing it with forethought, and where those things actually could have then a detrimental impact on kids. That would be how I think we should try to approach our planning.
Two questions. One, maybe three. Is it funded? My understanding, I thought I'd heard that, they're holding everybody harmless, so they're keeping the same amount of money in the budget, and then they're going to give the districts the adequacy, the tier 1, tier 2 money. Is that funded?
For 2018, my
understanding was they didn't have them. They passed this, but they didn't necessarily have the funds to do it.
They don't have the money to bring everybody up to the true adequacy number, which is why it will be millennia before we would see any new dollars. What they're saying is that whatever new dollars they do have, this is how they're divvying it up first.
So it doesn't bring everybody to adequacy right away. It's just an allocation for any new money.
New dollars.
So, and the second question then is, does any of this mean that they're actually going to pay their bills on time?
No.
So not only are they going to give us...
They borrowed $6 billion to pay a portion of the backlog.
They still owe us a bunch of money, and it sounds like they're not committed to... Even though they're never giving us any more money, they're still not going to give us the stuff they were supposed to give us. This doesn't add any help or certainty to the budgeting process as it pertains to them giving us the money they owe us.
No.
And I guess one last piece as it pertains to the calculation and the impact of TIFs on the adequacy calculation, and what does that mean for us in Elmhurst as the city may look at additional TIF districts, and what could that do to our funding?
Well, the TIFs aren't part of this formula. It was part of the amendatory veto. It's not part of this formula.
Okay,
the
so
TIF property.
As I understand it, new TIFs will be part of this.
Really?
This is what I understand is new TIFs will be added in, not old TIFs. Or at least they're added in the tax reduction referendum.
Oh. I didn't hear anything about that part of the...
All right. Okay.
They must not have addressed it in the webinar.
Well, we have a new advocate at the state level, so maybe we can try to prevent that from happening. But I think, John, I think we should confirm that, because I'm not sure on that. You may or may not be right, but I am unsure if that's true.
All right. I haven't read deeply on this, but just as a practical matter, the rhetorical question is this. We're at 109%. What do we got to do to get that down to tier 3 without reducing the quality of the education we bring our community? And that's something that's just going to take time, because there are some of our comparator districts that are tier 3, tier 2. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but you need time and to digest it and see if there's any way to make adjustments.
The tier 2 and tier 3 is because their local capacity target compared to their adequacy is lower than ours. So some of them don't have the property tax base that we do.
So that's it's not
It's a
things
part
that,
of the-
it's not
part
things
of the-
it's not things we can change.
Right.
I mean, my point on TIF was just to Margaret's point about where Elmhurst and what impacts Elmhurst, and they all interrelate. So as we define what it means to Elmhurst, that's I think an important piece to understand. What is the impact of existing TIF and new TIF?
And I always talk about our revenues are 85% property taxes, our locals 90%, and state is 7%, federal's 3%. But this 7% is going to be flat. The property taxes are going to be CPI. So our revenues are going to go up less than CPI into the future. And somehow our expenditures, we need to keep those expenditures from going up faster than less than the CPI when health insurance is going up. It's a very difficult equation, and we keep adding staff, and and part of it is because our enrollments are going up and our student needs are going up, but it really kind of puts us in a structural deficit type of funding program that we talk about a lot during projections and budgeting, that sort of thing.
Will you have the impact of this by the time we put in our preliminary budget for 18, 19?
Oh, 18, 19.
Because we just passed the budget in a weird way. We passed it after this year started. We just passed it just because that's the way the wonderful state budget works. But yes, so the next meeting we'll be talking about the following year.
No,
this final budget for the year underway. Mm-hmm. When do we start talking about, rather early after that, we start talking about the next one, right?
We tried to get PMA to come in January with projections, or late January or February in there for your projections.
Because, we ran a deficit this year, and if it's looking like we're going to run a deficit next year and really needing to factor all of this stuff in there, particularly given the hole that the city's refusal to pay us their obligations creates in our budget, we may have to look at doing something, unfortunately, from a cut perspective to balance our budget, unless the city comes through with the money. So I think when we get to that point in our budget cycle, I think we need to take a hard look at the next budget, because I don't think you can run at a deficit again, particularly if the city doesn't live up to its obligation.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any board communications tonight? John?
Reported in Cranes is what Dave was alluding to, that a former board member has been named a senior advisor of the governor on education issues, Emily Bastido. And congratulations to Emily. And I hope she tells our story at that level of administration of the state government. But congratulations to Emily.
Any other comments? No. Okay, hearing none. We have two upcoming meetings, September 26th Board of Education meeting and October 10th Board of Education meeting.
Shannon,
Go
one
ahead.
more thing about board communications. I'm sorry I let this slip. This Thursday, we're reconvening the parks, cities, schools discussions. When I started back in 2011, that was the staple of our intergovernmental relations. We would get together quarterly, or when we couldn't do it quarterly, at least semi-annually, to have a discussion about the things that were on the agendas of each of the three agencies, so we could share that and do some problem solving where there's mutual things. About 3 or 4 years ago, those kind of gave way to discussions. Stormwater took over and dominated the conversation. We even had public meetings that we attended and things like that. We tried last summer to restart a broader, multi-topic conversations between the governments. I think, Stormwater took that over again. But we're going to try again this Thursday. We're going to try to talk about things that affect all three agencies, the school district, the park district, and the city. And we'll talk about anything that anyone wants to talk about, our partners want to talk about. As always, our first and foremost consideration when cooperation is suggested is, what's the impact on education in our school district? That's our primary job, that's our primary responsibility, but we're going to listen and try to work together. Because these agencies pretty much serve the same communities. We're not exactly coterminous, as Margaret mentioned, but we are very close, and that's a real advantage because we can work closely together. Our district, it's been said, our district has a history of doing it that way. Tonight, you saw a vote. I'm not going to say any more than that, but that to me demonstrates the approach of the district. 2 years ago, we authorized stormwater project that I guess has been built, has been completed. It's now sitting in there virtually rent-free. All we asked was a playground to upgrade the playground for the school.
I might add, as long as you brought that up, it finally opened. The kids were playing on it this week.
That's great.
Yes,
that's great. It's not much. It doesn't compare to the land value that the district provided without compensation with that small compensation. It doesn't reflect the value of the land provided, let's say. 2 years ago, last summer, we negotiated what we thought was a tentative sale of property, a piece of Bryan campus, and that was not insignificant. It's a serious provision of a resource, a limited finite resource land to the city. Fortunately for all of us, the city decided to build that project on cheaper land, farther away from the school, and I think that benefits the entire community. This story of the district cooperating somehow meets a little different narrative sometimes. I know I've spent some frustrating times trying to refute different stories about the actions of the district, the motivations of the district, so forth. I'll just give you an example. A couple city representatives started talking about how TIF 4 agreement was generous to the district, and I had to correct them to say, no, that TIF 4 agreement was actually a settlement of the district's claim that the city was diverting TIF 1 IGA money, the TIF 1 release that we talk about now, to another TIF district. And so we made a claim, and that was a settlement, actually, of the claim. Ironically, that's what we're hoping to talk about here, which is a diversion of TIF 1 funds away from education, contrary to what we have stated, our commitments made to the community. So we're going to talk about anything and everything that the three partners consider important. And this is one of the benefits of living in a place like Elmhurst, where we can get together and in a small group talk about it and work on solutions because of our near coterminous nature, nearly the same boundaries, not quite the same, but very close, that we have more opportunity for mutual solutions. So I'm looking forward to working with our partners. I think the community expects us to do that, and I'm looking forward to doing that. So that being said, does anyone have an issue they would like to raise with our discussion partners at the Parks City Schools discussion on Thursday morning? Email me if there's something.
Dave, can you mention the State of Schools address on September 18th?
Certainly. The State of Schools address it? No, I'm just kidding. I don't believe that we've done this before in Elmhurst. I am familiar with it from previous districts where we've done some of this kind of thing. It was a recommendation from the Focus 205 facilitating team that we do a state of the schools and that we keep the community engaged over time so that this wasn't just kind of a one-shot process. And so we are going to do a state of the schools on September 18th at 7 o'clock at York in the Commons. And we've been working on putting that together, and I think we have a nice presentation that'll highlight some of the good things we have going on in the district and share some ideas for how we're looking to try to move forward from here. So.
Okay, we've reached the end of the agenda. I'll declare the meeting adjourned.